Greetings, retro lover. This is Ethan, aka the Ghost Mall. I make 80s and early 90s retro synth pop and soundtrack style music, and I'm coming at you in this video with another Work in Progress Wednesday. What I like to do in this series is to really just bring you a glimpse inside my home studio, and so you can get a behind the scenes look at something that I'm making. And in most cases, it's a song. I like to let you see songs that are just works in progress that aren't complete yet, so you can kind of get a sense for how I come up with those retro sounds, sort of my songwriting process, my production workflow, etc., etc. And if you'd like, please feel free to go back and check out my channel for a couple of those previous videos. But in this instance, I want to do something a little bit different. So what I'm working on today is not a song. It is actually something that I've never done before. I am currently in the process of creating my very first preset Soundbank for a software synthesizer. And in particular, this is for AudioThing's awesome little synth called miniBit. Now, as you know, if you've been following the channel for any time at all, I like to focus on making primarily, as I said, 80s and early 90s, sometimes late 70s pop music or soundtrack style music, whether it be film or otherwise. But one of the things that I love to infuse in my music, because it's so nostalgic for me, are the sounds of early video games. You know, I grew up in the 1980s, and so I spent plenty of time, maybe more time than I'd like to admit, in the 80s and the early 90s playing my favorite consoles, the NES and the SNES and the Sega Genesis, and even handhelds. I got the Atari Lynx in there in the mix, and a big part of that experience for me was the music, of course. And so AudioThing has this great little synth called miniBit, and it's inspired, I would say, primarily by the sound of the 8-bit era, but what it really has is a whole bunch of cool oscillator waveforms that are totally reminiscent of consoles from the 8-bit era and maybe a little bit into the 16-bit era, capable of emulating everything from like a NES or a Master System, Atari consoles, Commodore 64, maybe even with some of the new oscillators they've introduced, something like a Commodore Amiga. But in any case, it's a super affordable, super simple, super fun, and super nostalgic synth. And so I decided that I was going to actually come up with my own sounds for it. And so what I thought I'd do today is just kind of give you a glimpse into the middle of the process. I'm creating a sound bank, which is going to be hopefully between 50 and 60 presets, not aimed in particular at chiptune music per se, but sort of a taking chip music and video game music as a basis and pushing it forward a bit and adding some of my own The Ghost Small signature to it so that it would be applicable to retrowave music more broadly. So I thought I'd walk you a little bit through the synth because it's just an awesome piece of kit, and then also let you hear some of the sounds that I've worked on. I think I've created between 30 and 40 right now, and like I said, I'm aiming to have 50 to 60 in the sound bank. But yeah, before we talk any more about the sound bank that I'm working on, let me just show you around the synth. So again, it's miniBit by AudioThing. I think it runs for about $20, which is really astounding given how cool it is and how easy to use it is and what you can do with it. But let's just open up the init patch here. And what we have is a good old square wave. You know, I think 3 of the 5 channels on the NES, for example, were variable pulse width oscillators. So you could have a nice thick square wave, or you could reduce the pulse width. And so we have a couple oscillators in miniBit that simulate that. Kind of a thinner sound down to a thicker sound with a pure square wave. Got a triangle. This was the like the channel often used for bass sounds on the NES. And then down here we've got some noise channels. That was the 5th channel on the NES, often used for percussion. So, okay, so there are some classic chiptune, classic 8-bit sounds, but we have a lot more oscillators here. We've got a sawtooth wave. I believe that you could switch the Commodore 64 channels. It only had 3 channels, but into sawtooth. We have a sine wave, capable of producing more smooth kinds of sounds. And then we have these kinds of unique new oscillators. This is a voice type sample, kind of a formant sound. One called E-piano. is a great one, especially if you like me and love those electric piano sounds. We've got one called guitar. Doesn't sound much like a guitar, but again, we're talking about a 8-bit synthesizer here. A bell. And again, these are just the raw waveforms right now. We've just sort of started with an initialization patch. A string. One called transistor. One called duck. Definitely kind of quacky. One called matrix. And then these begin the atonal sort of noise channel ones. One called motor. And 3 different noise types. Like I said, usually used for percussion type sounds in those 8-bit consoles. All right, so that's the heart of the machine, are the oscillators. You can increase and decrease the volume. You can always add a sub-oscillator. Let's do that with a sine wave so you can hear, just to add some girth. You can change the tuning. If you double-click any parameter, you go back to default. You can change the fine tuning to sort of just make it sound a little bit drifty. All right, that's the main section here. And right now it's in poly mode, but you can switch it to monophonic too if you're doing like a lead or a bass sound. And then you can add in some glide if you want. You can go really extreme with it. Get that big glissando kind of pitch bend thing. Oh, and then this is the tuning for the sub-oscillator. How far down do you want it to go? And then you've got an LFO, which can be mapped to pitch, volume, cutoff, or the downsample parameter and the bit crusher. I'll show you that in a second. But right now I've got this amount mapped to my mod wheel. Sort of get some crazy tuning there with the sine wave, pitch oscillation, and the amount. So you can actually change the LFO shape. There's a sine, triangle, ramp down, ramp up, square, and sample and hold, which is great. I've been experimenting with this to add some sort of variability, randomness to it. I won't go through all of this in detail, but I'm going to just give you a tour without messing with all the parameters. But of course, you've got an envelope for your amp, and then you can switch it to an envelope ADSR for pitch, kind of typical synth stuff. Then you've got your filter. You can switch it to low pass or high pass. This is the cutoff, starting 20K down to 20 hertz. And the resonance, measured in percentage. Over on this side, you have the bit crusher, which is like really one of the coolest and most essential features of this. So let's go back to the initialization patch with just a good old square wave. But then let's take it down from 16 bits down to 8 bits. You can hear it sort of get grainier and grainier. And then if you turn up the downsampling, you get it distorted, a lot of artifacts. So that's really an essential piece of this machine. And then you got a simple delay. If you click in the sync, oh, and also, of course, you can sync the LFO. I should have mentioned that. But if you click in the sync, right now it's totally dry, so you won't hear any delay. But if I turn up the wet control, there you go. Adjust time here, 8th notes, 16th notes, all the way up to 32nd note, and triplet variants as well, or just a bar. And then you can also increase or decrease the feedback. So you can go with everything from like a really lush, long tail here to something, if you go with a really fast delay and low feedback, it's almost like a doubler or a really short ambience. Okay, so there's a little bit of a tour of the interface. And before I finish up this video, let me go ahead and show you some of what I've been experimenting with. I've had a really fun time creating presets with miniBit. And like I said, my aim is to create something that uses chip sounds from the consoles that I grew up with as a starting place, but that pushes them out in as many different directions as I can using the tools here available in miniBit and to sort of make them more amenable to retrowave music more broadly. So if you're interested in making retro music or any kind of music really, but you want to inject a little bit of nostalgia into it, I'm hoping that this Soundbank I'm creating will serve you. Like I said, it's a work in progress. Right now, the working title is Bits of Nostalgia, and I've got, like I said, 30 something sounds in a few banks here. But let me just show you a few of them. So here we have one that I've called Basic Triangle, because as I said, the triangle waveform is used for the bass on the NES. So I took that and kind of gave it a little more grit. And I've mapped the mod specifically to this amount on the LFO. But for each patch, I varied what the LFO is doing. So here, what I've mapped it to is volume. So it's going to be more like a tremolo effect with a square wave. And that's going to be kind of a really choppy kind of a tremolo. In particular, because I've got the rate up at 30-second notes. So really cool. I like that. How about a couple more basses? Let's see. Called this one Bitalo Disco. I might have gone a little bit overboard, I have to admit, with my 80s pop culture references in the naming of these presets, but hey, it's fun. And I think that people who appreciate this kind of thing and who might be interested in picking up a library of sounds like this, hopefully you all will dig the cheesiness. So the idea with this is that, and it gives me a chance to point out another feature here, if you click this little grid thing, what you have here is a really cool step sequencer. And you can have it 8th notes or 16th notes or any of the various subdivisions that I showed you with the delay. And then for each step, you can change pitch, volume, cutoff, resonance, the waveform, which is really cool because each note essentially can go to a different waveform, and the sample rate, so you can vary how crushed it is. But for this preset Bitalo Disco here, I just created a simple up-down ARP pattern octave thing, which is very, common and reminiscent of Italo disco music. You get the idea. So kind of taking that typical Italo disco trope, but using a good old console sounding square wave for the sound. How about one more bass here? I like this one. I used the duck waveform to create kind of a really harsh kind of a sound. I've got the volume mapped to a sine wave here at 16th notes on the LFO. All right, so there are a few bass sounds. How about some bells and plucks? This one's called Chime Traveler. So it has a nice sustain to it, so you could use it as a quick bell, but you can also kind of make it sustain as a kind of EP sound, or maybe even a pad. All right, so there's a Chime Traveler, and another one I really like is Pop. This one has a really short decay, and it's a square wave sound. So this is kind of something reminiscent of a sound you might have heard on the Sega Master System, for example, but I added some delay to give it more character and crush the bits quite a bit. And I mapped the pitch to a triangle here on the LFO. Kind of make it really crazy fun sounding. All right, so there are some bells and plucks. Let's see what else we have here. Some effects patches. I called this one Hats Off, Blast Off. So I've taken a noise waveform there, and like I said, often used for percussion on consoles, to make kind of a bit crushed hi-hat sound. But by mapping the down sample to the LFO, I can also create this crazy sweep sound. Pretty cool. Hats off, blast off. I like this one. I called it Perturbed Machine because I used quite an amount of glide here. So if I go from a low note to a higher note, and back down again. Really, really cool kind of mechanistic, apocalyptic kind of a low bit sound. All right, so from effects, let's do a couple leads. Here's just a regular old pulse width modulation lead with some delay. I really like this. Wanted this to be kind of a utilitarian sound. All right, nice delay with a lot of feedback there and the bits crushed down. And how about another lead? Oh yeah, I quite like this one. Imagine a 8-bit saxophone in a cave. Hence Jazz Cavern. Like that one quite a bit. Feel like that could be a useful sound. How about this one? Z-Funk. Hope I don't get a copyright claim for playing this lick. If anybody out there watching can identify that song in the comments, please leave me a comment. I'd love to see if anyone knows that one. But you had P-Funk, you had G-Funk, and the logical culmination of that would be to go to Z-Funk, I guess. Some pads. This one's called Cartistic Expression. Game cart was the jumping off point there. By mapping a sort of slow sine wave to the pitch on the LFO, I can introduce a bit of drift to the sound. It's sort of slow and kind of almost creates that sort of VHS warped tape effect here. You can go from subtle to really extreme. But just a nice utilitarian pad sound there. I actually started with quite an obnoxious waveform for the oscillator. It was that duck. But by reducing the attack way back, it sounds kind of smooth. And also bringing the cutoff on the filter down. How about one more pad here? I liked a lot of these, but I called this one Cloudburst. It'll let you see what you can do by mapping the sample and hold to volume on the LFO. Creates a sort of pulsing thing going on there, which is synced tempo. And you can increase the extremity, of course, with the mod wheel here. Not exactly a sound that a NES or a Master System or a C64 could make, but that was the idea, was to sort of expand upon that. Okay, I'm going to wrap up here with a few more sounds. My favorite category probably that I've worked on so far are the poly, synth, and keys, just because I like to play some nice thick chords. Let's see here. I called this one Pixel Suitcase, of course, referring to the famous Suitcase Rhodes electric piano. So as long as it's playing, you can hear those crushed bits sort of happening there. But I did want to provide an alternative because it's a pretty sound, but it's really bit crushed. So I made a variant on this from Pixel Suitcase to Fixed Suitcase, which is just high bit. Yeah, that sounds really good. And then no retro nostalgic synth preset bank would be complete without some brass. So I created a few brass polys. Again, a 8-bit and a clean version. Let me just play you the 8-bit version here. And that has kind of a warm sound, especially because of the bit reduction. I wanted to create something a little jazzier, a little snazzier, and a little funkier. So this one's called Cheesy Ass Brass. Super fast pitch modulation on the LFO here. All right, so there's some poly sounds. And last but not least, you can also, using the step sequencer I already mentioned, create some really cool ARPs and sequences. So I'll play you out with a couple of those here. Called this one Seventh Heaven because it's a major seventh chord sequence. Let's see, made one called Angry Transformer. And the LFO creates a really hard tremolo. You can bring in and out. And all right, last one. Let's do, this one's called Speak and ARP. Again, another 80s pop culture reference. All right, guys. Well, that is it. Thank you for tuning in to this Work in Progress Wednesday to see behind the scenes in my studio. And as I said, today I'm not working on a song. I am working on a preset soundbank for AudioThing's miniBit, tentatively titled Bits of Nostalgia from the Ghost Mall. Like I said, aiming to have 50 to 60 sounds, maybe more, because I'm having so much fun creating them. So if you're interested in this, please feel free to subscribe to the channel, because as soon as I release this, I'll probably be posting another video here announcing that. I'd love, if you are interested, for you to know about it when it comes out, and you can grab it. If you haven't grabbed AudioThing miniBit, you can grab the synth and the preset soundbank at the same time. I'll let you know when that happens. If you like this video, please feel free to give it a like. And if you know anybody else who makes music who might be interested in either this soundbank or even AudioThing's miniBit synth in general, please feel free to share this video with them. And until the next video, I hope you will be well, stay retro, and I'll see you on the next one, guys. Take it easy.